It's been a few weeks since we've been in this part of Matthew's Gospel, so I'm just going to give a quick recap. Matthew 5 is part of a block of teaching that Jesus is giving that we've referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, and it's showing us two main things. First, it shows us the character of Jesus, and therefore the character of the people of Jesus' kingdom. In this sermon, Jesus is describing who the people of his kingdom are. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and those who are meek, and those who are thirsting and hungering for righteousness. They are the salt of the earth, they are the light of the world." And in light of what they are, Jesus then explains, this is how you are to conduct yourselves. And we are these things, and we conduct ourselves in these ways because this is who Jesus is. The characteristics of the people of the kingdom are wonderfully embodied and fully displayed in the King of that kingdom, in Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount reveals to us the heart of Jesus, a heart which he then gifts to his people. So we need to hold on to three things as we go through the Sermon on the Mount. We need to hold on to our need of God's grace. Jesus says, chapter 5, verse 20, that to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must have a righteousness that exceeds the Pharisees. He goes on to say at the end of chapter 5, we must be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. A righteousness, a perfection that can only come from Jesus. We're being shown our need of God's grace, and we are then being shown the evidence of God's grace. As we live in this way, in the way that Jesus is teaching, that is the evidence of the work of God in our hearts. He shapes our hearts to be beatitude hearts. And therefore, as we live like this, we reflect the God of grace. Who he is, what he has done for us, and what he is doing in us. So we're being shown the character of Jesus. Second, we're being shown the authority of Jesus. The sermon begins with Jesus going up to a mountainside. He then sits down, a posture of authority in the culture at the time, and he then begins to teach. That's how it begins. It then ends with the people being absolutely astonished because Jesus taught as one who had authority. Jesus is showing his authority as God's king, who rules over God's kingdom and who leads God's people. And he also does that as the one who has authority over God's law. He is, chapter 5, verse 17, the fulfillment of the law. And he is the one who can correctly explain and apply God's law to God's people. And it's highlighted in that phrase that Jesus has used throughout chapter 5. He says, "You have heard it said by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, but I say to you." It's a phrase repeated twice more between now and the end of the chapter. Jesus is the authority on the law of God. Now, it was my original plan to go all the way through the rest of chapter 5 today, but time has escaped me this week. So actually, next week is going to be our last Sunday in the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to divide these last few verses between this week and next week, and then we'll start fresh in chapter 6 in the new year, which is a very scary thought, really, isn't it? Let's read verses 38 to 42, but let me pray first. Father, may your same Spirit that caused your chosen servants to write down your word for us be the same Spirit that opens our eyes, our minds, our hearts to your word now. May we see both the authority of Jesus and the character of Jesus, and would you shape us to be like him? For we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Matthew 5, verse 38, "You have heard that it was said, 'Eye for eye and tooth for tooth.' But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. This is the word of the Lord. Today is bonfire night. And there is an infamous story about bonfire night in Rachel's family. Rachel's my wife. Her dad set up a firework. He lit it. He retreated to a safe distance, only to then watch the firework begin to move towards the hedges. Off it goes. It shoots through 2 hedges into a neighbour's garden and explodes. After a sharp intake of air and a pause, they heard the neighbour's voice go, "I'll get you, Pasco." The neighbour was out for revenge, the thing that Jesus addresses here in the verses we've just read. Verse 38, "You have heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth." Now the reason they'd heard it said is because this is what God's word says. If you look at the footnotes, the small writing at the bottom of the page there, if you look at the footnotes for that verse, you'll see that there are 3 places in the Old Testament where it says eye for eye. But when you go and look up those passages, and it's always a good idea to look things up when the Bible points you to them, when you look up those passages, you will see that this was a rule that was used to respond when someone had done something to harm another person. It was a rule designed to ensure the right level of justice was applied to a crime. So, parking fines probably don't warrant a prison sentence. Or at least I hope they don't. But you wouldn't want a rapist to be dealt with the same way as someone who parks on double yellow lines. So it was meant to ensure the right punishment was given to the right crime, but it was also designed to limit and restrain the retaliation that someone could take if they'd been harmed by another person. I once remember getting into a bit of a battle with a friend of mine from work. He thought it'd be funny to put loads of his business cards through my letterbox. So I put 500 of our advertising pamphlets through his letterbox. So he empties a whole container of hole punches into the aircon system of my car. Imagine what happened when I switched on the engine and I went on my journey with snowflakes falling down all the way. So I decided to let his tires down. It's terrible, really. I should have read this earlier on in my Christian journey. But it's that kind of mentality that Jesus is warning against here. But sadly, it seems like instead, the Pharisees were using this law to justify the practice of escalating revenge. You have heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. They slap you, you hit them. They pull a knife, you go get a gun. They injure you, you kill them. Escalating revenge. And Jesus says that is not what this law is about, and it should not be the heart of the people of his kingdom. You have heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Rather than taking revenge, Jesus tells us we need to show generous grace. And he gives 4 illustrations to show how we're to do this. First, we're to turn the other cheek. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, you might not watch the Oscars, but last year's Oscars became rather famous because Will Smith slapped Chris Rock in the face when Rock insulted Smith's wife. Escalating revenge. You insult my wife, I'll slap you in the face. Now imagine having just been slapped in the face in front of millions of people, Chris Rock looks back at Will Smith and he offers his other cheek. And actually, I use this illustration because I think it's closer to what Jesus is trying to get at here in Matthew 5. You see, Chris Rock wasn't really in any physical danger. I'm sure it stung, but the insult, the embarrassment, was what the real slap was. You see, a slap in the face is really less about physical harm that's caused by the violence and more about the insult caused by the act. We even use that phrase, don't we? It's like a slap in the face. It's one of the most degrading ways that you can insult someone. And that helps us to understand what Jesus is getting us to do here. Jesus is not saying that if harmful people are doing harmful things, we should keep on letting them do it. He's talking about how we should respond to insults. So this isn't a passage we can use to say we shouldn't ever respond with force to someone who's harming others. You can't use this passage to condemn Israel for how they've responded to Hamas attacks. You can't just say, oh, they should have turned the other cheek. And Jesus is not saying that if someone is abusing you in some way, you just have to keep taking that. No, get to safety, take steps to make sure you're safe, and take steps to stop them from carrying on. But what Jesus is talking about here is how we respond when we're insulted, even in the most derogatory and inflammatory ways. Slapping someone across the face with the back of your hand is about the worst insult you could give to someone in Jesus' time. And Jesus says, let it go, turn the other cheek. And we need to particularly hear that in the circumstances that Jesus has told us we will be in as the people of his kingdom. Remember verse 11? Look back to verse 11 there. He says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you because of me. As followers of Christ, the people of his kingdom, we will be insulted. We will be misrepresented. People will say things about us that are false, that are defamatory, things that are hurtful and insulting. We will be misrepresented at work, by friends, on social media, by other parents in the playground, maybe even sometimes by people that claim to be Christians. They will insult us, they will misrepresent us, and Jesus says, let it go. Don't try and justify yourself. Don't try and explain yourself. Let it go, keep quiet, walk away, turn the other cheek. Talk about the gospel, yes. Speak about Christ, yes. Use your rights in order to further the gospel, yes. Defend your right to share the gospel, yes. But when it comes to your own personal reputation, turn the other cheek. It's so countercultural, isn't it? Personal hurt, someone's insulted you, someone's said something about you, you've got to call that out. You've got to demand an apology. They've got to be silenced, and they've pretty much got to be publicly flogged until they retract what they say. Or give as good as you get. If that's how they want to fight, yeah, you give it back. You fight fire with fire. The game is on. Jesus says, no. Be quiet. Walk away. Let them carry on. The world thinks it's strong to stand up for yourself. That's brave. To call out that person who's been saying those wrong things and unkind things about you. And it's weak just to soak it up and walk away. It takes an incredible amount of strength to turn the other cheek. As the one strong man, the strongest man, has already shown us. Peter he's one of the disciples sitting there listening to Jesus. And a few years later, when he looks back at Jesus' trial and crucifixion and his torture, he says this. He says, 1 Peter 2, verse 21, to this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Turn the other cheek. And then, verse 40, give another coat. So in Jewish law, if someone owes you something and you can't pay them back, then they can take you to court and sue you for your possessions. And they could have anything that you owned except your shirt. Your shirt you could keep, so you can keep your dignity and so you can keep warm. You were entitled to your shirt. And Jesus is using this picture of someone trying to take away your shirt. They're not entitled to have it, you're entitled to keep it, but Jesus says, give it to them and your coat as well. Jesus is saying, don't cling to the things that you think, or even that the law says, you are entitled to have. I remember at university, me and two of my flatmates, we used to pull together to buy food, and we went on this shop and we bought loads of food, and then me and one of the guys went away for a few days, and when we returned it seemed that the third friend had coped with our absence by binge eating. He'd eaten most of the stuff that we'd bought. And what do I say then? Excuse me, a third of that was mine, you need to go out and replace it. And we were supposed to take it in turns to cook and wash up. How often did one of us say, well, I've done my bit, I'm not doing anything more till you've done yours? We felt entitled. What do we feel entitled to? We feel entitled to in our marriages, from our spouse? What do we feel entitled to from our families? What do we feel entitled to from this church? In our work? Do we feel entitled to that apology? And we won't give up till we get it. Give it up, says Jesus. Give it up. People of my kingdom should never have a spirit of entitlement. And there's so much to unpick in the practical outworking of that. I have had a million questions in my head. I thought, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about that? Can I really encourage you, get to fellowship groups this week so we can wrestle with those things? But the thing we need to keep in mind as we wrestle through all the different ways that we might need to respond to this, we need to remember the standard that Jesus lives out for us. Remember to the letter to the Philippians, a church that's in danger of disunity because there is a sense of entitlement creeping in amongst people. And Paul says to them, Philippians 2 verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather in humility, value others above yourself. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. Entitled to all the glory of heaven. Didn't cling to it. Made himself nothing. Turn the other cheek. Give another coat. And then verse 31, go the extra mile. The situation Jesus is referring to here is that a Roman soldier could get you and say, right, I need you to come with me to go and do this thing. They were allowed to get you to walk in whatever direction they wanted you to, up to 1 mile. I'd love to know how they decided, yeah, I think 1 mile, that's far enough. We don't want to take the mick. And we see this happening, don't we, in the account of Jesus going up the hill towards his crucifixion. The Roman soldiers get Simon of Cyrene and they make him take Jesus' cross. It's massively humiliating for the Jewish people. Imagine you're on the way to the market square and a soldier grabs you and says, "No, I need you to take this to the city wall. It's in completely the opposite direction that you need to go, but tough, off you go." It's demeaning. It's a reminder that they weren't their own. They were occupied by this other force. And you can imagine it was a practice that was very often abused. "Oh, look, here comes this guy. Let's have a little fun with him. Can you go that way, please?" I read this week that the actor Robert De Niro is being sued by his former PA, and I saw the headline and I thought, "Oh, great, there's another Hollywood sex scandal." But actually, no, his PA is suing him because apparently he got her to perform menial and humiliating tasks. Things like he made her organize his dry cleaning and the mending of his clothes, and apparently on one occasion he even made her bring him a martini in an Uber. And I wonder what Jesus would say. Now, don't sue him. Take him some olives as well. And what is it for us? What's the menial task that you think is beneath you? What's the inconvenient thing that you don't want to do? What's the thing that you think, "That's not my job. It's not my responsibility. Who are you to tell me what to do? I'm not going to do it." Or do we say, "Sure, and is there anything else you'd like me to do?" Then the last illustration Jesus uses, verse 42, "Give to those who ask." How do you feel when someone asks to borrow that thing you really don't want anybody else to touch? I'm very precious about certain mugs. That's my coffee mug, that's my tea mug, please don't use them. What is the thing for you? They want to borrow your car, they want to borrow that tool, they want that favorite recipe, or maybe they want your time. Maybe they want to encroach on your hobby. What Jesus is asking us to do here might involve lending to people we don't think will treat our things in the way we want them treated. It might involve lending to someone we think won't give it back. It might involve doing something for someone and they're not going to do anything different as a result of it. It might involve giving to someone we don't think deserves it. And what Jesus is calling us to here is a sacrificial generosity. And the one we always love to give is, well, yeah, but should we just give to every homeless person we see? Now, I'm not saying that we should give money to homeless people, because there is wisdom to make sure we're not going to give them money that's going to just make their situation worse or allow them to keep on doing whatever they're trapped in. But I remember as a 12-year-old boy walking through a city at night with my uncle, and a homeless person asked him for money, and he stopped and he said, I'm not going to give you any money because I'm not confident about what you'll do with it. But I'm just going with my family for dinner, and I'd love for you to join us. That moment made a huge impact on me. It showed me the heart of an uncle whose heart had been shaped by Jesus. He genuinely wanted to show love to this man. And I didn't want him joining us for dinner. He was smelly. I didn't want him in a restaurant. He might have been rude. And am I going to have less because we got to pay for him now as well? What situations, what people are we tempted to withhold from? We're tempted to withhold our time, withhold our fellowship, withhold our love and care, withhold our stuff. Who is it that you think, well, they've had enough from me, or they've had enough from this church, they don't deserve any more? Who are you tempted to, verse 42, to turn away from? Jesus says, no, don't Don't turn away. Give to the one who asks you. Do not turn your heart away from them. Don't close your heart off to them. Instead, give your heart. Because if you give your heart to them, if you set your love upon them, then all your material resources and time and efforts, they're going to flow from that. It's a heart posture. And it should be something that we are particularly keen to show to other believers. Sacrificial generosity is something we should be particularly keen to show to other believers. The Bible tells us that we are to show particular care and generosity to the fellowship of believers. There should not be a single person in this church family we are not prepared to generously supply what they need. Sacrificial generosity comes from a heart that's turned towards others because it's a heart that has first been turned towards God. It's a heart that's turned towards others because first it's a heart that's been turned towards God. And it is countercultural. It was countercultural back then. It is countercultural now. It's not what you hear from the world. Yeah, sure, be kind. Maybe run that marathon for that deserving cause. But when people don't deserve it, when they don't deserve you, no, don't be a fool. There's even a deodorant advert for men about rugby, and it's a rugby coach, and he says, it begins with this line, I have to take care of myself before I can give to others. Now, I'm not suggesting that self-care and deodorant aren't important, but there is something dangerous about that heart posture, isn't there? I have to take care of myself before I can take care of anybody else. Can you see what Jesus is building on here with this illustration after illustration? Let go, don't be entitled, go further, give generously. He is saying this is a heart disposition that can only come from a beatitude-shaped heart. This is what it really means to be salt and light in the world. It is unmistakably the hallmark. It is a different ethos of a different kingdom, of a different king. And be honest, what are the things that stop us acting in these ways? Pride? Some of us will call it dignity, but it's really pride. We don't want that person to think they're better than us. We don't want them to belittle us. We don't want them to have power over us. So we slap back, verbally at least, rather than turn the other cheek. Or we won't take one step in the direction they've told us to, let alone a mile. You can't tell me what to do. But surely that is the opposite, isn't it, of a heart that is meek? Chapter 5, verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Pride, or maybe it's fear. We fear that if we don't stand our ground, that we don't fight back, that if we keep giving out to that person, that we're going to be used or taken for a ride or walked over, or that we're going to miss out. We've given our stuff to them, now we've got nothing. And that is a perfectly natural attitude if you don't believe in a sovereign and gracious God. It's a perfectly natural attitude if all you think is survival of the fittest. Well, of course you're going to have a heart that's driven by fear. But the opposite of a heart driven by fear is a heart that is pure. A heart that recognizes its need to wholly depend on God. It's the pure in heart, the poor in spirit that seek God, trust God, and depend on God, and therefore they can give out. And we fear missing out, we fear being looked over, we fear being disenfranchised, and yet what do the meek get? They get to inherit the earth. You're not going to miss out on anything. Pride, fear, or maybe just forgetting that this is how Jesus loves us. That when he was taken before the Sanhedrin and they slapped him and they spat on him, he turns the other cheek. That when they took his clothes, he lets them cast lots for them to divide the spoils. When they force him to walk up that hill, he goes all the way to the top and onto the cross. Because you know, we insult Jesus with our sin. We slap him when we fail to give him the honor and the glory and the obedience that he is entitled to. We fail to humble ourselves before him. He could ask us to walk 1,000 miles and we should want to walk 10,000, and yet often we don't want to take one step in his direction. And then when we, poor beggars, with nothing to offer, with nothing deserving of his goodness and generosity, we ask him for forgiveness, and he gives us life. And he continues to give to us his grace day after day and time after time. Have you ever heard a child say something like, "Oh, I keep getting it wrong. I keep doing the wrong thing." And you say to them, "Well, today's done. Tomorrow's a fresh start." "Yeah, but what if I do it again, or what if I do it even worse?" Say, "Do you know that's the amazing thing about Jesus?" And go back to him, you say sorry, and he continues to give you his grace. He never turns his heart away. Friends, this is how generous Jesus is with his grace to us. He pours out his life. He pours out his love. He gives and he gives and he gives to those in need, undeserving of his love. And it's his grace we need to have if we're going to have hearts like this. Pray that he would fill our hearts this morning so that they overflow with his grace. Generous, sacrificial grace. We need to remember this grace to us, to be so touched by his generous grace to us that it just overflows out of us and overflows towards others. That our hearts would be so shaped by the generous grace of God that it is turned towards him so that it is then turned out towards others. It will only be through the grace of God touching our hearts. If you're struggling with pride, if you're struggling with fear, if you're withholding yourself from others, then you need your hearts filled once again by the generous grace of Jesus Christ. To truly offer the other cheek, to truly let go of our entitlement, to truly walk with another, to truly give and give and give again. We need hearts that are shaped and overflowing with the generous grace of God. What love could remember no wrongs we have done. Omniscient all-knowing, he counts not their sum. Thrown into a sea without bottom or shore. Our sins they are many. His mercy is more. What patience would wait as we constantly roam? What Father so tender is calling us home? He welcomes the weakest, the vilest, the poor. Our sins, they are many. His mercy is more. What riches of kindness he lavished on us. His blood was the payment. His life was the cost. We stood neath a debt we could never afford. His sins, they are many. His mercy is more.